shambles, and desertions had become a major problem. In the North, the Democrats increasingly attacked Lincoln's handling of the war and his emancipation of the slaves. When the federal government had to resort to outright conscription, riots broke out in New York City. It was necessary to use army troops to restore order. On the battlefield, the Union advance had stopped. Ulysses S. Grant seemed bogged down before Vicksburg, and another advance on Richmond ended with a complete defeat at Chancellorsville. During the summer, the tide of battle turned. Lee invaded the North and lost the crucial Battle of Gettysburg at exactly the same time the Union Army took Vicksburg, and with it control of the Mississippi. Last stages of the conflict. Following his victory at Vicksburg, Grant became General-in-Chief of the Union Army and invaded the South on all fronts. While William Sherman led the Western armies through Georgia, Grant forced Lee slowly back towards Richmond. Unable to defeat or outmaneuver Lee, Grant settled into a long siege at Richmond and Petersburg. For a while, Lincoln feared that the apparent stalemate before Richmond would result in his defeat in the election of 1864, but Sherman's capture of Atlanta revived Northern morale, and Lincoln beat Democratic candidate General George McClellan by an overwhelming majority. In the winter of 1864 and the early spring of 1865, Union forces were victorious everywhere. Lee surrendered his army on April 9th. 5 days later, John Wilkes Booth assassinated Lincoln, but the Union had been saved. Effects of the war. The war profoundly changed the United States. The death of 618,000 men and left many women bereaved of husbands and either encouraged or forced them to seek roles other than those of wife and mother. 4 million African Americans were free but not yet equal. Industrial workers suffered from the wartime inflation, but hoped that the Republican Party would take up their cause. The war gave the federal government predominance over the states, even though the states continued to have primary responsibility for most functions of government. In the realm of economic policy, the Republican Party had enacted measures to encourage businesses, and the federal government would continue to play an activist role in the economy. Most of all, the war organized the American people. An individualistic society of small producers had begun the transformation towards the modern bureaucratic state, a development celebrated by intellectuals like Ralph Waldo Emerson, who had once espoused the autonomy of the individual. The most pervasive change in the Northern society engendered by the war was an organizational revolution out of which many of the huge corporations that colored the post-war period were born. Philanthropy was also affected by this revolution, the most notable example being the certain of the sanitary commissions early in the war. In general, the war encouraged a shift away from traditional individualism towards social discipline and collective action. In many ways, the Union's ability to organize, mobilize, and modernize won the war.